I'm Lauren Layfield, and you're listening to Your Next Podcast. This is the podcast that brings you a different series every single week, helping you to find your new favourite show. As you might have guessed from the title, this is a show about people we know and love and where they came from. Now, there's plenty of interview podcasts out there, but what sets this apart for me is that these are really high-class conversations with some really fascinating people. And this episode is a perfect example of that. You're about to hear Cush meet Anna Wintour, the biggest name in fashion. And given that she's usually thought of as something of an enigma, I was really surprised to hear how much she opened up to Cush in this. So, enjoy. This is Origins.
Welcome to Origins, the show where the biggest names in entertainment tell me 3 stories that made them who they are today. So why Origins? Even the most successful people have to have started somewhere, and I'm very nosy and want to know where that place is. So I've decided to find out what makes some of the most successful people in the world tick and how. I'm just recording quickly before my guest arrives. It's 7:30 a.m. in New York City, and I'm looking out from the 28th floor of this huge Sony Music skyscraper in Manhattan. And I'm watching the city wake up. I can see people coming out of the subway and yellow taxis going up the busy streets and smoke coming out of the sewers like Ninja Turtles. And it's mad to think that somewhere among all of that traffic, weaving her way in a chauffeur-driven car, is my guest. I am very, very nervous. I am sat here in this huge studio. Side note, why is everything in America so much bigger than in England? My studio in London is like this quaint little English shoebox with like furry walls. And this is like some kind of soundstage from a Hollywood movie. I'm trying to compose myself because I'm about to sit down with Dame Anna Wintour in about 5 minutes. Now, you may think she's all Devil Wears Prada. You've seen her on the front row of the biggest fashion shows in the world, sunglasses on, completely unreadable. But I know that there's so much more to her. Yes, her resume is formidable. She's editor-in-chief of Vogue and global chief content officer at Condé Nast. She's chair of the Met Gala, or the exhibition, as she calls it, and she is the last word in fashion. But I'm here to talk to her about her origin stories. So the plan is to talk to her about her relationship with her father, her life as an assistant before she became the boss, and the importance of her children in her life. So, wish me luck. Then again, I guess if you're hearing this, then we managed to pull it off, and you are listening to the very first episode of Origins. Coming up on Origins.
I really didn't have much talent when I was young. I was not good at anything. I got fired from Harper's Bazaar because I couldn't pin the dress. I can't remember. People were so shocked. When they were little, they always saw me with the dog, so they used to call me Dog. But I'm the lady with the dogs. 3 dogs. Yes.
How are you? Welcome to the strange room.
How are you?
It's nice.
Thank you for doing this, Anna.
Of course.
So last time I saw you, it was at Vogue World London. Then I realised when I was thinking about it today, then you must have gone into all prep for Fashion Weeks.
Yeah.
Then you did the Met Gala.
Yeah.
And then you did Vogue World Paris.
Yes.
So when are you having a lie down? You don't even really have a lie down.
I don't know, but Vogue World Paris was...
How did it go?
It went really, really well. And what was so extraordinary about it, Cush, is we were able to achieve what everybody told us would never be possible, which was to have it at the Place Vendôme. And it was just, the most beautiful day.
Are you guys ready to start? Okay. Anna, Thank you for doing this.
Of course, my pleasure.
I love you so much. You're one of the most inspirational people in my life.
Thank you.
I've been interviewing lots of people this week in New York, and I told my son yesterday that I was interviewing you.
Oh, how old is he now?
He's 6.
6. Good.
If you can believe it. I'm recently divorced now, very happily.
Yeah.
But I remember when you said to me once in New York, and when are you having a baby? And I said, well, yeah, but I'm doing this TV. And you said, no. You said, Cush, when are you going back on stage? And when are you having a baby? And you thought it was really important. And you were absolutely right. He's the best thing I've ever done.
Yes, it gives a balance to everything you do.
It does give a balance, yeah.
Yes.
And he's 6. So frankly, he doesn't really know who you are. So what I said, what do you think a global chief content officer does or an editor-in-chief does? And my son said, is it like Spider-Man? So,
maybe.
When you think
Climbing
about
buildings.
it, most people know, everybody knows who you are. Yeah. But to somebody who didn't know who you were, how would you describe yourself and what you do?
Well, I think the most important aspect of what I do is, first of all, surrounding yourself by incredibly talented and creative people and listening to them, and to have a group around you that has a different point of view and isn't in any way intimidated or nervous about speaking their point of view if it disagrees with you. I think that's it, with what you might be thinking. I think that's so important. Then I think it's also very, very important to really remain in touch with what's happening in the world. I always say to young editors when they're being given a new role, it's so important to walk in the street. The minute you cut yourself off and you don't use your eyes or read a lot to see what's going on, and understanding that everything that we do, if we work as you do and I do in media or the arts, is to understand that nothing works or happens in a vacuum.
No.
You're always being affected by other streams of cultural thinking or political thinking or whatever's happening in the world. What you do is part of that and reflects that. Then I think it's also incredibly important to enjoy what you do. I always remember my dad saying to me, I decided to stop because I was too angry all the time. I got too impatient, and that has always stuck with me. But I also think it's really, really important, if you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can use the platform that you have to help others and to do some good in the world. So whenever I'm embarking on a new project or thinking about next steps, I'm always thinking about, well, how will this help other people? What can we do that, yes, it's important for the company, it's important for Vogue, important for the museum with whom I do a lot of work, but what else can we do to be inclusive and to help others?
So basically, my son was right. You are Spider-Man, because what I'm imagining is there's you, and then there's all these other webs of things shooting off from you, and you're swinging things around and connecting people together and giving a lot. So actually, he was right. You are like a superhero.
Well, I'm sure your son is as smart as his mother, and I've never thought of myself as Spider-Man, but I will in the future.
There's a first time for everything. Yeah. So Anna, you're not going to remember this, but I remember the first time I met you. And it was at a supporting British theatre breakfast in New York about 15 years ago. And I was in New York for the very first time. I'd never been. And I was doing Julius Caesar, this all-female show that was going to St. Anne's Warehouse.
Oh, right.
And you came into this very swanky breakfast restaurant, and all of us actors and Philip Deloy, the director, were there. And lots of really cool theatre supporting influential people had come to kind of like welcome us to New York. And we were sat next to each other, and you ordered grapefruit. And so I ordered grapefruit. I never had grapefruit for breakfast before. I was so glad they didn't bring it in the fruit, so I just didn't squirt anything. It was all in a lovely bowl. And you said to me, so tell me about what you've been doing other than Julius Caesar. And I said, well, I've written this one-woman show about Josephine Baker.
Oh, right.
And it's been in London, and I'm trying to desperately get it on here, but I don't know anyone, and I'm walking the streets having meetings with producers. I don't have any money, and I'm trying to, and you sat there and you kind of listened to me rambling on for a while. And then you said, well, tell me all about it. And I was like, okay. And I sat there and I told you all about it. And that was the beginning of you essentially being so supportive, helpful, being a connective, creative tissue between Josephine coming from London and opening at the Public Theatre.
Right. No, I remember that.
Which led on to many, many things.
Yes.
And I hadn't had an experience with somebody like you do that before. And you seemed to really enjoy what you could do to help it. Where has that come from?
Well, it goes back to one of my great passions is the theatre. And I was so lucky as a child. My dad, who was a Fleet Street editor, loved the theatre. And he took all of us, there were 4 of us, to the theatre from a very, very young age. And later in his career, he edited a newspaper called the Evening Standard, and he launched the Evening Standard Theatre Awards. And he used to take me to the Theatre Awards when I was very young.
He used to take you to the Theatre Awards?
Those days it was a lunch, a very long and boozy lunch at the Savoy that started at 11. And I think people straggled out of there around 6 o'clock. But because I was exposed to that, I remember, I think that the first thing I was taken to was in Stratford. It was A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Charles Laughton was in it. And I do remember that.
How old were you?
I was 7 or 8, but I just remember the excitement and the stepping into this amazing world that, you as a child, you really believed. And, I have young children that I now take to the theatre, and you see their eyes out on stalks when they see something that they are transported. And I think that's something that theatre can do for you that as wonderful as film and cinema and television and other arts forms may be, that is unique to the theatre. And because I had that so ingrained in me at such a young age, I've always loved the theatre. I also have so much admiration for people who direct or are on stage, because to me that's much more of a frightening experience or difficult experience, or requires more talent and more sensitivity than a film. I mean, I'm sure film is difficult, but you can do it over. When you're up there on the stage alone, it must be an extraordinarily rewarding, but also extraordinarily terrifying experience. So I have nothing but enormous admiration for those who dare to do it, yourself included.
I mean, I've always known you have this because, of course, when I first knew about you, it was when you were running the Evening Standard Theatre Awards. And it took me a while to understand that your dad had also run those awards and been the editor of the Evening Standard. So was that an epic feeling to then be able to take over that or move into that or do what he had been doing?
Yes,
but in a bigger way?
It was, it was a way of honouring my love for my dad and his legacy.
Putting people in a room together at a dinner or an event, like this is a very an old school way of bringing people together.
Well, I think we spend so much time, particularly in a post-COVID world, looking at our screens. I think it's really important to make sure that people meet in real life, talk in real life, communicate in real life, because in the end, it's about human connection and exploring creativity together. And it's why I love working on exhibitions the way I do at the museum, because, every year Andrew and I will discuss what the theme of the exhibition for the museum is going to be. And it's often planned 3, 4, 5 years in advance.
You're talking about the Met Gala.
Yes. And it's trying to come up with the best expression for that exhibition in terms of the night, the opening night, who we might ask to be co-chairs or the guest list, or what it's going to look like on the stairs.
And that's
leading
how far
up.
out you'll talk about it, 4 or 5 years.
Yes. I mean, because costume exhibitions have become so popular, and I think that is a lot to do with the success of Andrew's remarkable work. Many other museums around the world are thinking about these exhibitions because they bring in so many visitors, because they are a different expression of art that I think maybe some people are intimidated to walk into the V&A or intimidated to walk into the Metropolitan Museum, but it brings in a visitor who then might stop and go and look at the Impressionists or the Egyptian galleries or whatever it may be.
Yeah, because we're all so connected. And I think we discovered that especially during and after the pandemic, that the arts, we're not divided up. We're very, very connected.
But look how creative people were. I mean, how the National put on all those shows that you could watch online.
Yeah.
And, people found a way. I mean, we found a way to self-generate content when we were all in our living rooms talking on Zoom, thinking, what the hell are we going to do? You find a way. And sometimes through adversity, you are at your most creative. I mean, what did you do during COVID?
I wrote a play.
Well, there you
I
go.
taught actors online. I mean, I did things that I never get time to do.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is you found yourself reconnecting in ways that you hadn't
Yes.
before. So you're totally right. Okay, Anna, we're going to get onto your first origin story, which is about your father. You've talked about your father being the editor of the Evening Standard. You said he took you to the theatre. It was a very creative upbringing, but also he had a very important job. And you've talked before about you were on vacation. He had to leave when Marilyn Monroe died to get back to the paper. But it seems like you all had a very close relationship with him.
Even though there were 4 of us, my 2 brothers and sisters are so smart. My older brother went to Harvard. My younger brother went to Oxford. My sister was one of the first women admitted to a Cambridge college that was a men's only Trinity College at the time. And I was kind of, is Anna at the dry cleaners or the hairdresser or is she shopping? So I was not on their intellectual plane, but I did learn from my dad and from everybody being in the house how exciting a news story could be. And that sense of journalism and following the story and breaking the story has always stayed with me. And because we had writers and editors and politicians and actors, that world that was at home or, at our house in the country at the weekends is something I have consciously or unconsciously always kept with me and probably always tried to recreate. And similarly, right from a very young age, I took both of my children to the theater. Even at a point, I remember going to see, I think it was Madonna. I can't remember what it was. Something that was not quite suitable for a 7 or a 6-year-old, and being stopped by an usher as we were walking into the theater and saying, that this is quite unsuitable for people of this age, and looking at me with, great...
What is this woman doing?
Yeah, exactly. And then B said to them, nothing that we haven't seen before, and just walk right through.
Yes, B. She's already become a creative. She already knew.
And, she's grown up and become a super successful theatre producer.
She has. She's an amazing producer and somebody with the same kind of mind. Mm-hmm. Did you see any of your dad's management style, and do you think you took on any of the way he managed?
Sure, he was super direct and very fast in his thinking, and I certainly am similar, but I've also worked for people in my own career growing up that haven't been that decisive and sometimes have waffled a bit, and I learned how annoying that is.
Mm-hmm.
Not annoying, but just how confusing in a way it is. And like, you don't know what to do. And then they change their minds. And honestly, yes or no is much easier to accept and to act on than, well, let's talk about it some more. And somehow, the air, comes out of the balloon if you're not decisive and excited.
So would you rather someone who's just decisive but occasionally makes mistakes?
Sure, you learn from mistakes.
Than someone who's kind of waffling along.
It's very frustrating, I think, to work with or for someone that is not clear in what their vision is and not clear in what they expect. And I also believe very strongly, Cush, in delegation. You have to trust the people around you and expect that they will do well and not micromanage. But I kind of like adversity and struggles. And I think when things are not going as well, that's when you find your best ideas. I do think when the chips are down, that's when you think outside the box.
Definitely. I think that's when the best stuff happens. You just talked about, you were like, I might have been shopping or having my hair cut, almost like you were the naughty teenager. Were you a rebel?
Well, it was an interesting time growing up in London in the 60s. There was, you're English, you know what the class system is like in England, and all those... The beginning of those rules were being broken. And I remember seeing the Rolling Stones on television for the first time. And if you look at those images now, they're just so innocent. And like the hair is a tiny bit longer. But I remember being deeply shocked and thinking, this isn't something that I've seen before. Musicians dressed like that, looking like that. And as innocent as they seem now, and you think what we see every single day now, nothing is shocking, but it was such a time of change and music and fashion being so alive and coming from not the common places, not the usual places, that maybe I was drawn to all of that and less to education. I certainly was not the best student.
And was there
maybe because, my brothers and sisters were so successful, I didn't feel I could compete. But, I went to work at a very, very young age in journalism because, I just felt it was a way of expressing yourself that was very engaging and exciting and different. It was a very small world, Cush. And we think back to those days when journalism was only print, and my dad's paper maybe had 15 editions. And then you think today, what an extraordinary amount of ways you have to communicate through social, through videos, through print, through events. I mean, there's almost nowhere you can't go, and it's global. And how amazing that is to have come from this very tiny, somewhat particular world to being so inclusive and having this enormous opportunities available to you.
If you were starting out now, would you still go into journalism?
That's such an interesting question, because I think the most successful people working in journalism today are very self-sufficient. I was talking to our global creative director yesterday, and he was saying all the people that I'm bringing in are videographers, writers, photographers. They're very self-contained. They can do everything. So you don't need all these different layers of people. And I'm not sure that I have those talents to be so self-sufficient. I like working with people. So I don't know whether I would go into journalism. I like to think that I would, because it's so much part of who I am. And I'm so lucky to work, across all of Condé Nast with such extraordinary journalists and editors. And they really, I'm sure you find that with your community, Cush, you're as good as the people that you work with, and you learn from them every single day. And I do love the curiosity of journalists and that interest in the truth and telling the world what's going on.
Have you ever directed a film?
No.
I think you should. No. I really think you should.
Well, only if you're in it.
Fine, it's done. And now I want to ask you about your second origin story, which is about you as an editorial assistant. I find it difficult to put your name with the word assistant. I struggle with that a lot. But I wanted to know.
I was a terrible assistant.
I want to know.
I couldn't do any of the things that assistants are meant to do, like type or, sew on a button, or I was awful.
What, you couldn't touch?
I still can't type very well, but it's like, it was a very different time where people got jobs with no discernible skills, but maybe somebody knew someone. So that's sort of how you ended up in that position. And it was really wrong, and I was very bad, and I just was lucky. I was just very, very lucky.
Did you do something at Harrods for a little while as well?
Yes, yes, when I was at school. And I was no good at that either. I really didn't have much talent when I was young. I was not good at anything. And I think coming to America was, my mother was American, and so I had dual nationality, and it was sort of easier to come here in an anonymous way, because in England, Cush, as you well know, you were defined by where you went to school or what your accent was or what your dad did. And that wasn't interesting to me. It was, and you came to New York and everyone is from somewhere else and they didn't care. So you became much more anonymous and you succeeded on your own terms. Although I wasn't very good working here at the beginning either.
Well, I don't know, Anna.
I wasn't. I really wasn't. I got fired from Harper's Bazaar because I couldn't pin the dress. I can't remember. Like, people were so shocked. But then I landed up at New York Magazine. That was really, I was so lucky. But I worked for this amazing a man who was a mentor to me called Ed Kozner, who was the editor of New York Magazine. And somehow he saw something in me. He saw that I had a sense of journalism, and then I saw the story, and working on a weekly felt so fast at that time, having worked on monthlies up until that point, and closer to what my dad had done and what I had learned. So it was a really good fit. And because I was a one-man show, I did have to do a lot of things that I was bad at, but I found
But you did them decisively.
I did them decisively and fast and with confidence, completely faking it. But Ed was so kind and so generous.
And other than Ed being a great mentor, do you have a memory of, were there many other women around at that time that were mentors to you, or that were?
Well, Kay Graham, who was, the owner of the Washington Post and was a very close friend of my father's, she was a mentor to me when I moved over to Vogue. And obviously she was born into, enormous wealth, got married and had children. And then, the unfortunate circumstances of her husband's death meant that she had to take her, and he was running the Washington Post at that time. She took it over and sort of learned on the job and, saw us all through Watergate and became an incredibly successful publisher and a very independent woman that she certainly hadn't started out being. That she sort of followed the course of women through that time. And I always looked up to her and admired her. And she gave me a lot of extraordinary advice and help and introduced me to so many different people. And I always remember that kindness and that generosity. And then when I moved over from New York Magazine to Condé Nast, I was mentored by a wonderful man who had the job that I now have, editorial director of the company, called Alex Lieberman. And he was a painter, a photographer, a journalist, and a remarkable man. And he was so helpful to me. And I think when you've been helped a lot in your career, I hope it teaches you to help others.
It definitely seems to have rubbed off on you. Your third origin story, Anna, is about your children, Bea and Charles. Can you tell me about them?
Yes, obviously my kids are everything to me. And my daughter, as you know, is a very successful producer, and watching her develop and, seeing her, whether it's producing a play during COVID in our living room or one of her Tony Award-winning plays, seeing how much care and attention and determination and respect for people that she puts into her work makes me extraordinarily proud. I was actually in Europe preparing for Vogue World Paris, and they moved the Tonys, I think, a week later this year, but I flew back just for the night to support Bea, because I am so proud of everything that she's achieved. And on a more personal note, it's sort of, one of my closest friends was this amazing woman called Franca Sozzani, who was editor of Italian Vogue, and she was given her job the very same week that I was made editor of American Vogue.
No.
And, over the years, we were both, I've been there obviously longer, but she was in her position at Italian Vogue for many years. We became very, very close friends. And she has a son, Francesco, who's a little bit older than Bea, and we would always talk about our kids and describe their ups and their downs, and whether we were worried, whether we were happy. And there was a while, I guess 8-9 years ago now, when we were talking about Bea and Francesco, and she said, Francesco's single right now, so and so. And I said, yeah, well, Bea is single. And then, sort of a light bulb went off. And I asked him to come to the Met, which was very soon after that dinner, and sat them in the same table. And then, even though they had known each other since they were young, now they're married. So
I remember her saying after they got engaged, I saw her at one of your dinners or something, and I said, and gosh, where did you meet him? And she said, I've known him almost my whole life.
No, because Franca, for many years, the house I live on, Sullivan Street, has that private garden in the middle, and she had the house right opposite.
No.
Yes. So for years and years and years, she didn't use it that much because she was based in Milan. But when she came to New York, she would stay there. And then she gave it to Francesco.
So now you can just cut a little door and the grandchildren can just run through.
Well, sadly, Francesco sold that house.
Oh, gosh.
But at the beginning of their romance, the garden played an important part. And then, my son Charlie is a doctor, which his dad was a doctor, and he works in mental health, which was his dad's field as well. And he likes to remain private because of his field and what he does. But, he's been incredibly successful working with young people who suffer from severe mental illness, schizophrenia and other things. And he's done so well, happily married with 2 children and lives very close to his sister. I'm so lucky to see children that have done so well and found their partners and succeeded in their careers and
that are happy.
And that gives me security in my work, I think, to know that that's there.
And what about grandchildren? Because I know you're obsessed with babies. You're always telling me to have babies. So have you enjoyed?
I have 3, yes.
3?
3. I'd love more, but that might be it. No, they're great. They're
what do
great.
they call you?
Anna.
Do they?
Yes, they do. They do.
I'm going to go for that. I'm going to do a Cush thing.
Yeah.
Do they know what you do?
No, we don't talk about that. And they're not old enough to really.
You're just Anna to them.
Yes. We play tennis. We discuss the dogs. When they were little, they always saw me we have 3 dogs with the dogs. So they used to call me Dog. But, I'm the lady with the
dogs.
3 dogs, yes.
That's what your grandparents should be.
Yeah.
I have a little message from your daughter, B. I asked her to describe what she thought made you special. And she sent me this little voice note. So I'm just going to play it to you. Right, here we go.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Cush. When I think about what separates my mom from others, it's how incredibly supportive she is of the people in her life. I've never met someone so excited to celebrate the success of others. And she lights up when she has the chance to honor or toast someone's achievements, which she often does with themed cakes. And she's just such a cheerleader of anyone lucky enough to be in her world. And at the same time, if she knows someone is struggling, she is the first to pick up the phone to see how she can help, to get on a plane, to be there for someone, to see what someone needs. She really defines unconditional love and is certainly the most supportive person that I know.
Well, that's lovely.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Yes. Well, she and I host this pre-Tony dinner every year, and we invite as many of the Tony nominees that we can fit into Sullivan Street.
Yeah.
And B will spend weeks, months planning these cakes around each of the plays that whoever it is has been nominated for. So she is more of the cake person than I am.
She's trying to put it onto you, but it's actually, I do remember being at Sullivan Street and you putting James Corden on a cupcake.
Gone way beyond cupcakes now. Like they're a work of art. Wow. So I will have to send you pictures of the cakes that we did this year. But that is all B's brilliance and sense of humor. And we do make fools of ourselves. We stand up at the end of the dinner and we make a speech that tries to incorporate all the shows that are represented in the room. And this year it was her idea. We started with, we're going to work backwards and like merrily and ask you all to make a standing ovation.
Yeah.
And we were doing it as a joke, but then embarrassingly enough, every single person stood up and
got an ovation.
Yes. So then we were so mortified we could hardly continue, but it was actually very touching and moving. But she's the cake person, but that's lovely what she said. And I really do feel it's important to be there for people in the bad times as well as the good times.
Anna, it's been an absolute joy to have you come and talk to me.
Thank you.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I only know you as a massively supportive, very funny, creative, cheeky, fairy godmother. And I feel it's always a great privilege to know you.
Oh, thank you, Cush.
So I'm really glad you came.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for coming on Origins.
It's been really fun.
I would be thrilled if you could follow Origins on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts to get new episodes every week. Thank you to our brilliant team here at Sony Music Entertainment. Production management is Jem Mystery, cameras is Camille Workman, the studio engineer is Sam Bear, and the mix engineer is Gulliver Tickle. The producer is Hannah Talbot, and the exec producer is Alex Lawless.
And if you enjoyed that, there's more episodes out now with some really fascinating names. I love episode 2 with Golda Rochevelle because I found out that she is Guyanese and I'm half Guyanese. So yeah, obsessed. So go and check that out by searching for Origins in your podcast app. But before you do that, make sure you follow your next podcast right here so you don't miss a thing from me. And you can find all my recommendations with news, reviews, and much more on Podcast Rex at www.podcastrex.com. That's www.podcastrex.com.